Hello and welcome to Talking Leadership for the 21st of our 21st in the podcast series. My name is Eric Perez and I'd like to welcome you all to the podcast. Today's guest has an extensive leadership background and I'm just going to go through his CV very quickly. He has been the Executive Director of the Rice Growers Association of Australia. He has also been the GM of Corporate and Customer Operations for the Murrumbidgee Irrigation. I hope I said that correctly. He has also been the CEO of the National Farmers Federation and is currently, over the last 5 years, has been the Chief Executive of the Australian Rural Leadership Foundation. And for the podcast listeners, I'd like to welcome Matt Linnegar. How are you, Matt?
Well, thanks, Eric, and thanks for having me.
Matt, it's a pleasure to have you here. So the podcast is around individuals' leadership experiences. So in that vein, I'll kick off with question number one. In which industry was your first leadership role and why did you take it on, Matt?
Yeah, look, I think leadership, as you know, it happens sometimes planned, sometimes spontaneously, sometimes you don't know how you end up there. And of course, that can start at a young age and go on from there. But I guess in terms of in work, so to speak, or in work roles, I had a number of roles coming out of university. Where I went to what was Hawkesbury Ag College back in the day, now the Western Sydney University. But I think the first real role in terms of leadership, if we want to talk about positional leadership anyway, was probably back with the Australian, what was then the Australian Meat and Livestock Corporation, which is now Meat and Livestock Australia. And I think I became the youngest marketing coordinator that they had at that stage anyway for Southeast Asia. So I was 24 when I went into that role.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it was a fantastic opportunity for me. And I worked with a network of people throughout a number of Southeast Asian nations, some of whom I'm still friends with today. Fantastic people, and they were the ones driving what we were doing then. I had the fortune in that role to really play a role of coordinating all of those activities throughout the region, but really it was them doing it. But I'd say that's the first positional leadership role in my working life that I really felt, that I was in some form of leadership position.
Well, thanks for sharing, Matt. So across the different experiences you've had and in the introduction, looks like you've had a lot of different leadership positions. Can you share with me if you have a view on this or a position, or more accurately to say, do you believe that there's a difference between management and leadership?
Yes, I do. I think they're both necessary and needed, and I think they do intertwine, but I do think they're different. And the way I describe that is that leadership is far more people-centered and people-focused, where I would say management is a little more task and content-focused, although, strategy and to think critically and strategically is needed in both areas. I describe it more that way. So, so leadership is far more people-focused, people-centered than management is.
Okay, so management being about the task and leadership being about the people, but not exclusively one way or the other. Is that?
Well, management, of course, you would say you're in management, therefore you're managing people, which is true.
Yep.
But I guess I'd say that from a leadership perspective, it is that is really about understanding yourself in a more fulsome way, and seeking to really understand those other people that you're leading, that you're working with, that you're seeking to both support and to respectfully influence. And that can occur and will occur, inside or outside those management structures, and in fact has nothing to do with positional leadership. So I would say there's probably a lot of managers who might seek to leverage their position for change in behaviours, for change in what's happening in the organisation. And I would say, from a leadership perspective, you wouldn't be seeking to that sort of leverage. You'd be seeking to respectfully influence, and people would do that, and they would follow because of your behaviours, because of the way you interact with them, not because of your position.
Thanks, Matt. Can I segue into this one's thrown up a few interesting responses. I'm assuming you'll enjoy this particular question. Leaders sometimes make mistakes. How do you, as a leader, engage with the mistakes that's attributed to your leadership?
How do I engage in the mistakes? Is that what you're asking?
How do you engage? Yeah, so how do you deal with a mistake once it's been identified? Yeah.
Oh, well, the first thing to say is that, if you're any sort of leader, then you will have made numerous mistakes, and you'll continue to make them. I mean, firstly, it's very human. Secondly, if you're not making mistakes, then you are taking no risks whatsoever. So I don't see mistakes or failures or the fear of failure as as something that leaders should be absolutely stewing over. Obviously, to not make the same mistake multiple times is another matter altogether. But
sure,
I think the first thing is to acknowledge that mistake. What's led to making it? How much has it got to do with things inside your control, outside your control? To what extent is it a systems and process issue? And to what extent is it a behaviour and relationship and people issue? And just identifying what it is, what was your thought process that went into that contributed to that mistake. And but for me, it's about critical reflection following something like that, unpacking it, trying to understand what were the contributors, and really importantly, what most people do when something goes wrong is think about what went wrong and who else contributed to that going wrong. And I'd always encourage other people, start with yourself. What were my behaviours? How did they impact other people? And to what extent was that a contributor to what went wrong? So critical reflection after something like that, and deep reflection is what I try and do, and obviously what we encourage others participating in our leadership development programs to do as well.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that's thrown up two ways of looking at that question that hasn't really been raised before, and that is unpacking what went wrong and analysing as much as you can, but then also taking that the introspective step and looking at your behaviours and what did you do to contribute to whatever that mistake was. And now when things go wrong, sometimes you're talking about degrees of impacts. So small mistakes can be dealt with quite quickly, but if you're talking a system-wide mistake, it may be something that was never in your control, or the circumstances are such that anything you couldn't have done anything in those circumstances to change the outcome. So now I appreciate that perspective, Matt. So can I move on to the next question is really around what in your travels, what you found is the most difficult part of being a leader?
Yeah. People will say, and it's true, that sometimes, leadership is a lonely place. But I think that's mostly the case because we make it that way. In other words, we've taken on a leadership position, the buck sort of stops with us. And so, I'm going to try and deal with everything myself as well, which is ultimately a mistake. Leadership is a process of social influence and interaction. So if that's the case, then to try and deal with everything yourself sort of goes against really what leadership is all about. So, trying to have people that you trust and you're happy to lean on in times like that, and you can call them mentors if you like, but in any event, it's someone you've got a deeper level of trust in, and you're happy to be vulnerable in front of, is really important for any leader. So anyone thinks they can do it all themselves, or anyone thinks they know it all, probably, has got a bit to learn about what leadership is. So, that sort of network, being able to have those people who not just will support you, in other words, encourage you and say everything's going to be okay. You need people who are also going to identify, hey, listen, if you continue going like that, you're going to burn out, or by the way, your behaviours are contributing to the problem here. You need to straighten them out. So people are going to have the conversation who can be, sort of brutally honest with you, with some sort of support in there as well. So
truth, the truth tellers in your life, the ones that give it to you, what's and all that can be confronting sometimes. I think just to reflect a little bit in the leadership path that I've had, I've met some people that are an expert at being able to reflect and want and desire criticism and critiques. And there's other leaders I've met that you couldn't go near them with a summary of their behaviour or what they've done, because they would just explode. And so I don't think that's a universally held view, but it's a good way to manage your life, let alone be a leader, is ask people, what am I doing well, and what am I not doing so well, and how can I fix what I'm doing? And that's just I guess that's the degree to which you're prepared to let your ego take a couple of hits to be a better person, not just a better leader.
Look, ultimately, I didn't see this at a younger age, and I have seen it as I've matured as a leader. The more comfortable you can be being vulnerable in front of other people, in fact, the stronger you are. People see vulnerability historically as a weakness.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Yeah. That's.
I don't. I'm increasingly seeing it as a strength. You can be vulnerable in front of someone and walk away, finding out a little bit more about yourself and your ability to alter your own behaviours, and therefore, potentially have a more positive influence on others around you. The stronger you're going to get, and the more effective you'll be as a leader. So, yeah, that's and that hasn't always been the case, but it's come to me as I've matured as a leader, and I really believe that's true.
No, I can't speak for all the listeners, but I think that's an excellent piece of advice. Matt, can I ask you, how do you measure success as a leader? And I'm not saying generically this is what the textbook's saying. You Matt, yeah. How do you measure success? What's a measure of success for you?
Yeah, most people, when asked this question, will go to the performance answer. In other words, what boxes were we able to tick, and and all the traditional measures, financial, strategic, and otherwise, is where you'd normally go. I think the measure of success for me is the extent to which you're able to lift and support other people around you. So when you started with a group of people compared to where you are at a certain point in time, are they all now where are they on that journey in terms of where they were to where they are now in terms of being at their best, so to speak. So I think for me, the real measure, yes, the strategy is important. Yes, getting those other results is important. But for me, there's a couple of things. One is the extent to which you've been able to positively impact and influence others around you. Would be a huge measure of success. And the second one for me would be, to what extent, can I now choose to change my behaviours given a changing context and given increased complexity that we deal with as leaders? Am I better able to do that now than I was 12 months ago, 5 years ago, whatever it happens to be? Then that's the second big measure of success for me.
Wow. Okay. Matt, I've got 3 statements here that I'd like your perspectives on, if I could. The first being, and this again related to leadership, on-the-job experience develops better leaders.
On-the-job experience develops better leaders. Then what? I guess.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
No.
So. Okay. Well, I guess this is what would I say to that? I would say that lived leadership experience is vital, and I'd say that academic leadership experience, that is, I know some of the theories and models and ideas and whatever about leadership. It is really important to consider those, to reflect on those as it relates to your lived leadership experience. So what I'd say is, if you don't have the lived leadership experience, you only exist in the other world, then you're not going to develop very far or fast as a leader. So yeah, lived leadership experience is that try, fail, succeed, and everything in between is essential.
Okay, and you kind of answered the next one, which was about does formal education help to develop a better leader? So in the absence of experience,
it does. And what we'd say, in terms of the foundation in our work, we're really focused on whether you finished school in year 10 or you've got a PhD and everything in between. None of that will matter in our approach, which is based on experiential leadership. So all of those people have got a lot to learn from each other, and formal levels of education shouldn't impact that. What we would say to all of those people, though, is, think more, read more, explore more about some of those concepts and ideas around leadership in whatever form's going to suit you. So the education piece in that sense is important.
Yeah, that's. I could ask you 100 more questions about that, but we'll leave that for another podcast. It's a vexed thing, this thing about formal education in terms of the leader, and if I'm hearing you correctly, living the life of a leader can come about irrespective of what your educational background is. And the measure of that for me is one of the first podcasts that I did was with a gentleman by the name of Ben May, who started up his own IT business, and now he has multiple IT businesses. And he went from finishing grade 12 to having a passion for developing infrastructure around IT, and just started his business. He didn't go to uni, didn't get formal qualifications, and they call those people, the literature says at least, well, these are the entrepreneurs. But he's another example of a great leader that took some risks, like you were saying before, and got an outcome, not necessarily having a piece of paper to back him up to do it. It didn't, that wasn't going to be a roadblock for him. He did say, though, down the track, like you've mentioned, that having those skills and getting a piece of paper or getting some formal skills just increases the toolbox you've got of things you can draw on to be a better leader down the track.
Yep. So here's two things I'd say about that. The first one is that you can approach the education element of that by saying, if I can grab these formal qualifications as I go, some people will see that they're tools that, they'll learn some tools from that they can put into the toolkit, that they can bring to bear as a leader as they start to lead. And so that, I guess, that skills and competency-based learning, I'd agree, is really important. And I'd say, as a leader, that's not enough. That's not enough. So I would say, unless you're doing the other piece, which is about understanding yourself in depth, your own behaviours, what they look like at the core, how you can choose to change them, given a world of complexity and changing context, and then how that relates to forming relationships with and respectfully influencing other people. So that behaviour and relationship side of things is as, if not slightly more important than formal skills and competencies. And you need both in terms of leadership. Because if you only do the latter one, and never change your behaviours or never have the awareness of those behaviours, your ability to change and therefore have more influence is very much a lesson.
Wow. Okay. Again, took 4 hours on this, but we don't have hours, so I'll move on to the next question, Matt. Statement. Sorry. Leaders are born, not made. What's your view on that, Matt?
Disagree.
Okay.
Leaders are absolutely made. They're made from a range of things, a set of experiences. Yes, people are born with and will naturally have, stronger leanings in attributes in one area than another, and they might be a bit more charismatic than another person, and all of that sort of stuff. But we do not have born leaders. We have leaders who are made from a range of experiences over their life. So, yeah, I disagree.
Okay, and that's I've had mixed views on this. I wish I could say that I had a view. I'm still a fence sitter on this one. And that's been my experience, but that's only me. I'm only one person. Matt, now this is a bit in the podcast where I ask the question around leader capability. So part of what, and I'm still studying at the moment, I'm trying to get my qualifications around leadership development, and part of what I'm looking at in my thesis is to say that the capability of strategic thinking and foresight some of the most critical in fit for future leaders. So, and I'm not asking whether you agree with my thesis or not. It's more, what are your views around strategic thinking and foresight as a set of leader capabilities?
Yeah, look, I think strategic thinking, or, to put it crudely, the ability to get off the dance floor and onto the balcony is really important. Is really important for leaders of any stripe, anywhere. You could be leading in a community at a national level and everything in between, and that's still going to be important. So I'd agree that it is a core skill set, if you like, for leadership. So I'd agree with you.
And your views on foresight?
What do you mean by foresight?
So that ability, that cognitive ability to be able to plan and see future possibilities in what you do as a leader. So where we're going to be a week from now, 5 weeks from now, a year from now, that skill set in a leader to be able to imagine different futures.
Yeah, I think, that to me, that's part of strategic thinking. To be able to sort of do some future casting and look at different possibilities. And so I'd agree. Leaders can bring others around them and work with others who might be better at that than them, and still do well. So is it a good asset to have as a leader? Yep. Where does it sit in the relative importance of other things? I don't know, but I'd say, for me, a leader who's absolutely aware of self and has high levels of awareness of others, those two things would be more important than what we're talking about here, to me.
Okay.
But not to say that what you're talking about is not important, because I think it is.
Yep.
So particularly, that strategic thinking is not just, as most people think, what's the strategy for our organisation?
Yeah.
The strategic thinking is also about self and what's going on around you and those relationships. So you're in the weeds, and Eric and I aren't getting on for some reason. I can't work out why it's not getting on, because I'm stuck down in what's going on day to day. I'm not lifting myself above that situation and trying to think about, all right, okay, so what's actually happening here? How are my behaviours affecting things? How are Eric's behaviours affecting things? And how can we change that? That's still strategic thinking in my view.
Yeah, mate, no, you don't want to work with that Eric guy. He's just pain in the backside, mate. So my last question, Matt, is and this one's a nice one to end the podcast on, is what would you say to a younger version of yourself about being an effective leader?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Thanks, mate. It took a while to come up with, but I thought it'd be a nice one to throw right at the end.
What would I say to myself, the younger me? Well, here's a couple of things that I would say. The first is, don't ever think about what job is next, but think about what impact you want to have and on what stage. So that'll be a big thing. People think about career and they think about the next job, and that should be a consequence of you thinking about where you want to have impact and not the other way around. So that's the first thing I'd say. And the second thing I'd say to my younger self from a leadership perspective is not to run on just what comes instinctively to you. Think a bit more deeply about what you're doing and how you're behaving and how you can behave differently if you want to, and the positive impact that can have.
Nice. And that on that very positive note, I'd like to thank you, Matt, for joining me on Talking Leadership.
That's a pleasure, Eric. Thanks for having me.
It's been great. There's a few things for me to mull over, particularly around that issue about the toolbox and what leaders need to be effective in their work. So thank you for sharing your experiences with us. That was Matt Linnegar joining us for Talking Leadership. I'll catch everyone on the next podcast. Thanks again, mate.
Thanks, Eric.